Hello, this is Ashley Reed from GamesRadar, and I have beaten The Evil Within.
And I'm Lucas Sullivan, and I haven't beaten that game, so tell me, Ashley, how is this as a horror game? I mean, most horror games rely on atmosphere to deliver their scares, so what's the world like in The Evil Within?
I definitely think that's the game's strongest feature, is its ability to create a strong, really kind of terrifying, gross, grotesque world. On a superficial level, the graphics are gorgeous and photorealistic, and it basically looks like a movie. You're watching it and you're just like, wow, yeah, okay, I actually expect that to come out of the TV and get me, so I better get out of the way. Enemy designs look really cool. They all look suitably like torn apart and messed up and just gross. They don't necessarily make much sense in the context of the greater narrative. Things are occasionally just thrown in order to look scary, but they do, so I guess that works. And while it's not necessarily frightening in the way Silent Hill or even PT was, it definitely has this grotesque feel to it that's almost visceral, like you could reach in and touch it, even though why would you ever want to do that?
It's icky. It's gross.
Exactly.
And the character models look pretty good, too.
They do. They all look, just the characters themselves all look really realistic. And also, when you have those grotesque elements to the characters, those are really well done and really pop and are very visible. So they look really good.
Right on. So what's the gameplay like?
The gameplay is kind of an interesting mix of things. It's got a lot of mixed messages, which kind of puts in an unfortunate spot. It gives you different options for how you can come at the enemies. You have stealth options, you can use traps, you can use straight up combat. But unfortunately, in practice, it ends up favoring straight up combat a lot and doesn't really prepare you for it. Like, you'll run into situations where you'll want to stealth, but enemies will see you right away, instantly, or they cannot be stealth killed. You'll try to walk up to them and stealth them, and there's no option to do so, which is awful. It's like, why would you do this to me? And methods of distracting them can be really ineffective. You can only pitch a bottle so far to distract them, and often they'll end up looking at you after you've thrown it, so what was the point of that? And then that leads you into a lot of combat scenarios you didn't necessarily want to get into because you're very ill-prepared with basically zero ammo, and melee is useless. For every 2 hits that you give them, they will give you 1 much harder hit, and you will probably die. So there are some good options, and when you get to fully utilize them all, it makes this really awesome experience, but often enough, you don't get to use them as much as you would want to.
Yeah, and it seems like the health is kind of unfairly distributed. Like, you die in 3 hits, and it takes like 5 to kill the typical enemy or something like that.
It's pretty much like that, and plus you have the difficulty of your health does regenerate, but only up to a certain point, and because it's so easy to lose health and so hard to gain it back, that's effectively your new maximum. So someone else might be able to do this a little bit better, but at least I was running around a lot on that absolute maximum of what it would regenerate to. So I would die in like 1 hit, just gone. So that's a bit of an unfortunate thing to add to, though some people might like that as it adds an extra challenge to the experience.
Sure. So what's the story? Why would I be doing all this?
The story is actually, it starts out really interesting with this really cool premise and really cool mystery. You basically, like I said, Sebastian is thrust into this crazy, gross world where everything wants to kill him, and he's like, why the heck am I here? And he keeps being randomly transported into different areas of the world, not knowing how this is happening. He only knows from the beginning that it has something to do with this weird guy who massacred everyone in this mental hospital. So you're trying to figure out what's going on with him, and you're also trying to figure out, based on these journal entries from Sebastian, how he and the antagonist are connected, because they seem to have this really distinct parallel in their lives. But unfortunately, it starts to kind of lose momentum as the game goes on. Well, not even necessarily as the game goes on, because in the later chapters is when it really starts to pick up. But as it comes toward its conclusion, it kind of fizzles out and pulls back from giving you a really satisfying answer to these plots.
So that's the story, the world, the gameplay covered. How is this as a horror game? Like, were you scared when you were playing it? And if so, how did it scare you?
I wouldn't say that it was specifically frightening because of the way it was set up. A lot of times you would be fighting the same boss over and over and over and over again, because you would need to perform very specific actions in a very specific way in order to kill them, which you had to learn by dying over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. So in that way, it kind of removed some of the horror aspect, but it still came at these horrifying concepts in a really interesting way, because one of the big themes for this game is kind of a body horror, I guess is the best way to explain it. Like you've seen in the previews, the giant brain, that actually plays in pretty frequently, and how manipulating a brain can alter someone's mind, which is terrifying if you think about it. And it does start to really come at that idea in a way that most horror games don't, so it's definitely an interesting take on the genre. It unfortunately does pull back a bit from doing something really, really uncomfortable with that idea. Like you want it to push further if it's going to be truly horrifying, and it doesn't quite get there. But the concept in and of itself is interesting enough to keep you wanting to find out what's going on.
Sure. So as a whole, how is this as, an action game or a horror game or a stealth game? Is it all those things? Does it succeed at all of them? Or does it kind of just lose its way trying to do everything at once?
I think it's more successful at parts of those, some of those things than others. If you're looking for really challenging combat, that's what this does. It puts you in scenarios where you will die on step 6 of the 9-step kill the boss plan, and then you have to do it all over again, each time dying on the next step. So if you're into that kind of thing, this game, you're gonna love this. This game will be amazing to you. If you want to come at it more of a stealth aspect, that works in a couple of levels, but not as well as others. So you're probably gonna end up being pretty frustrated with situations where they toss you into an arena and they're like, kill all these bad guys. Like, great, exciting. And in terms of horror, I would say if you're looking for the kind of, I know I mentioned PT, if you're looking for that kind of distinct terror, constant terror, that's not really what you're going to get from this. You are going to get a really interesting look at some really gross but also weirdly, morbidly fascinating stuff. So if you're going to enjoy that, then this is going to be the game for you.
Cool. So what'd you end up scoring?
I gave The Evil Within a 3.5 out of 5. If you want to learn more, you can read my full review at GamesRadar.com and check back at the GamesRadar YouTube page for more video reviews and more The Evil Within.